A big question many millennials are asking is, should I have hope for marriage? We hear a lot of depressing statistics about divorce coming in, sometimes even from our own pastors. And we wonder if a happy marriage is even possible. Best-selling author Shanti Feldhahn says divorce isn't the greatest threat to marriage, discouragement is. She's here to talk with us today. Shanti, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
So your book, The Good News About Marriage, is pretty huge. You debunk the myth that 50% of marriages end in divorce. How do you see this affecting the millennial generation?
Well, one of the things that we've seen in the research for years is that the millennials are the ones who have the least hope for marriage and actually should have the most hope for marriage, because the millennials actually have the lowest divorce rates of anybody since divorce started skyrocketing when no-fault divorce happened in the 1970s. So actually, it's ironic that they're actually doing the best job of being purposeful and cautious and trying to be careful to pick the right, life partner that they commit their life to. And they also have this feeling of futility and discouragement, and they shouldn't.
So we know that even the best marriages aren't always happy. Why is it important to stick it out? And what is it about our generation that maybe tends to sabotage us in that area?
Well, actually, it's really interesting. I actually have seen in the research that the millennial generation actually has this amazing, powerful ability that once they commit, they really want to commit. But they're nervous and they're cautious because they've been believing all of these really discouraging things that turns out are more myth than truth about how difficult marriage is. People say marriage is hard. I think the millennials have grown up hearing people talk about marriage being hard. And I think we've done a disservice to this generation. We should be talking about marriage taking hard work, certainly. But there's nothing inherently complicated about marriage that should make a millennial think, oh my gosh, it's going to take 3 years of psychotherapy if I start having problems. No. It turns out that there are a lot of very simple things that can make a very big difference. And so I think honestly, it's one of the things that millennials need, that hope, in order to feel able to commit. So that's why I'm trying to get this word out there.
What are a few of those things that can make that big difference?
It's interesting. I actually studied for the last 3 years. I studied the most happily married couples to find out the answer to that question. And I was really encouraged that what I saw from them that they were doing differently than most other couples. It wasn't like the big stuff. It was these little things like, when they had heartache and conflict, like you said, everybody does at times, that they refused to believe the worst of the other person's intentions, even when they were really hurt. They forced themselves to believe the best and to for example, say, ow, that hurt that he said that to me. And instead of thinking what we automatically think, which is, he kind of knew how that would make me feel, and he said it anyway. That's kind of what we tend to think. The happiest couples would do the reverse, and they would say, no, I know he loves me. I know he cares about me. So he must not have known how badly that would make me feel, or he wouldn't have said it. And it's believing the best of their spouse's intentions. That's an example of a mindset change that anybody can do. And it turns out it's actually really powerful. Another thing is that these happy couples, they've learned that there are some little things that really matter to men. If you do them every day, if you're a wife and you do it every day, it's little stuff like saying thank you, noticing that he changed the light bulbs or played with the kids when he was tired after work and saying, thank you for doing that. You're such a great dad. Those kinds of things, we have no idea as a woman, those are powerful. And that's a little thing. Or for a guy, he has no idea that when he puts his arm around his wife in church, and he kind of does that regularly, or he reaches across and takes her hand when they're walking across a parking lot, it's a little thing. But in total, those little actions tell his wife, I care about you. I would choose you all over again. And those little things actually add up really big. And it's not rocket science.
That's great. And I know in your book you talk about how most couples actually are happy. What statistics did you find on that?
Yeah, I actually, this is so encouraging. I have noticed that most of us tend to think that most couples aren't really happy, most married couples. If I ask people randomly, I'm a social researcher, so I do a lot of random research. If I'm randomly asking someone in a coffee shop, what percentage of marriages do you think are happy? Most people will tell me they think, oh, about, 30% of marriages are really happy. And that's about normal, and they're flabbergasted when I tell them that there have been literally dozens of studies on satisfaction in marriage, happiness in marriage, including my own. I've done one. And that overall they congregate around 80% of marriages being happy. Now, that's not perfect, but that's not roommates either. Most people really do just enjoy being married, about 8 in 10. And there's actually really good news, even for the 20% who are maybe struggling or kind of have a so so marriage. There's a big study that was done that found that if the people who are the most unhappy in marriage, if they commit, we were talking about the importance of commitment earlier, if they commit for 5 years, this study followed them and found that 80% of those unhappy marriages were very happy 5 years later. Because there is power that comes from being all in and saying, I am not going to have an eject button, and that divorce is not an option. And we're here, so we're going to make it work. There is a great power that comes from that in building a happy marriage.
Have you found that millennials have trouble wrapping their mind around this at all? We've kind of gone our whole lives with this 50% statistic looming over us. Is it hard? Have you seen it all in your research? Is it hard for them to accept this new reality?
I think it's hard for all of us to accept this new reality. I mean, it was hard for me. That's why it took me 8 years, because I'm like, I'm not believing what I'm seeing in the data, because it's become such just a part of our culture. And to be able to tell what I do is I show young people, if you're a millennial, you're not necessarily harder to convince, but you do very much want to see the evidence. And most people do. And so what I'll do is I'll show them a table from the Census Bureau that shows that if you put people in a room and you single out the people who have only been married once, whether they've been married and divorced or still married, right? And that first marriage, 71% of those people are going to still be married to their first spouse. That's what the Census Bureau numbers show. And and by the way, the 29% that aren't still married to their first spouse, a big chunk of that is people who were married for 50 years and their spouse died. So that's not even just divorce, that's death and divorce. And so I'll show a millennial, for example, these numbers, and I'll say, now look here at that's just a snapshot in time. That's just at one point in time. So let's look over the course of 30, 40 years, and let's look at the people who've been married 30, 40 years, the baby boomers, who have the highest divorce rates, actually, because they came of age during the bad years when no fault divorce was really skyrocketing. And even almost 7 in 10 of those people, they've had 30 or 40 years worth of chances to get divorced. And almost 7 in 10 of those are still married to their first spouse. And so it shows them, there is actually the truth here, and we've been missing it all these years. It's a very complicated arena, but when you bring it back to the most simple truth, that we do not have to have this sense of futility about marriage. And you bring it back to the simple truth that no, actually, most marriages are strong and they are happy for a lifetime. A millennial feels, okay, you know what? I don't have to hold back out of fear. I don't have to try to protect myself. That I really can do what I want to do, which is to be fully committed and be all in. And I don't have to sort of avoid something that will make my life so much richer because I'm worried I might fail.
Definitely. I can't speak for the entire millennial generation, but I know in my own experience, a lot of friends got married young or got married fast. Is there a formula, a right or wrong for perfect age to get married or the perfect amount of time to date before you're ready?
Actually, the studies that have been done on this have found, I'll be honest about what they found and not found. There have been a lot of people who've looked at it. I've looked at it in my research. And the key is being purposeful with a lifetime commitment, first and foremost, of saying divorce is not an option. However, there is also a much greater risk factor of getting married young, quite young. If you get married, for example, before the age of 20, those people, you could say, getting married as a teenager, you don't really know who you are, much less who the other person is. Now, you can still commit for life, and many people do. I have friends who that was their pattern. But it does add stress factors, and it does add problems that maybe didn't need to be there. And so what they found is that the longer you wait in your 20s to get married, the more of a chance there is of avoiding some of those stress factors, and the more chance there is of having a lifelong and happy marriage without some of that stuff that maybe could have been avoided if you had waited until you were a little more mature. You had been able to evaluate this, whether this truly is the person that God has called you to marry, rather than just sort of that first blush of, this is your first crush or whatever. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but yeah, that is what the studies have found.
In your research, have you found where marriage generally comes in on the millennials' priority list?
Oh, you mean their overt priority list or their sort of subconscious priority list? Because I'll tell you, the overt, like what they say, I can wait for marriage, career is more important, establishing myself. I got to make sure I get a good education, and then I go to graduate school, and, I'll get to marriage somewhere in my 30s. What we have found is that is more of a pattern for the millennials, is delaying it, which actually, like I was just saying, isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as you're being purposeful about it the same way you might be purposeful about a career or education. Like, you don't just let education happen, you pursue it. Well, you can't just let marriage just kind of happen and assume it's just going to come to you. You have to be purposeful about something that's so important in your life. And that's one of the problems I think millennials have, is they have this idea that it's just going to happen. It's like, no, actually, if you work 80 hours a week and you always miss the singles retreats, you may not meet anybody. And so it's important to be purposeful. Subconsciously, however, no matter what anybody says, most millennials, most people in general, there is a desire to have a deep, lasting, lifelong commitment, a lifelong marriage with that one person who's going to love and appreciate you unconditionally. Most people long for that, whether they say that they do or not, or whether that's a priority right now.
This is such great stuff. I've got one more question for you. Another myth you debunk is that attending church regularly doesn't make a difference in the divorce rate. It actually does make a difference. How can millennials who are in serious relationships or newlyweds take advantage of this?
Well, honestly, the success factor it's overwhelming. And it's one of the things that makes me so upset that we've bought into this. I had bought into this idea that church attendance doesn't matter. It actually matters a huge amount. It drops the divorce rate anywhere from 25 to 50%, just church attendance. And in order to take advantage of that, I think you need to understand why that matters so much. It's something about, it's not just, getting in church on Sunday morning. There's something about being under good teaching and taking that seriously and trying to listen and learn. Like, for example, suppose you're 20 and you realize maybe I should wait a couple of years, and give this relationship time. And in that time frame, learn all I can about how to have a good lifelong marriage and consider that an investment. That's something you could do in church under good teaching. It also is incredibly important to be a part of community where people will notice if something goes wrong. When you're married, it's not just about church attendance for the sake of sitting there for that hour on Sunday morning or whatever. It's because you're part of a community and you go out to lunch with friends after church, and you're part of maybe a small group or a women's Bible study or whatever. And there's someone who's going to notice and go, Shanti, are you and Jeff okay? and kind of crack open something that maybe needed to be cracked open, and some light shined on it. And well, actually, we're kind of having some trouble. Well, let's talk about it. And how can we walk you through that? That is why I think one of the reasons God tells us to not stop meeting together. And so that's one of the success factors I would encourage every millennial who is seriously dating, engaged, or married to focus on, is to get themselves part of a church community and plug into friendships with people who can walk life with them. That one thing, I've had pastors tell me, that one thing is one of the strongest success factors you can have for your marriage.
Shanti, thank you so much for taking the time to do the research and give us all some encouraging news. Her book, The Good News About Marriage, is available wherever books are sold. I've got a copy, and I encourage you to get one too.
Thanks so much, Caitlin.